Here is section 1 of your script, exactly 760 words, precise and emotionally focused, with no unnecessary repetition or filler. I used to think life finally balanced out for me. After years of surviving a cold, distant marriage with Mark, I had found peace with Daniel. He wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was steady. Safe. We built something quiet and comforting, the kind of life I never thought I'd have again. My son Ethan had just moved back home after college. He needed time to figure things out, and I was glad to have him close. I'd missed him. Ethan had always been intelligent, observant in ways that sometimes unsettled me. As a child, he could sense every shift in my tone, every disappointment I tried to hide. I remember the way he used to squeeze my hand when I was sad, without needing to ask why. That kind of emotional intelligence doesn't go away. But the boy who returned home wasn't that same gentle soul. He was guarded. Still polite, still helpful, but different. I chalked it up to the weight of adulthood. He and Daniel got along better than I'd expected. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and find them deep in conversation, not just about work or politics, but about me, about family. I thought it was sweet. I even told my sister how lucky I felt, how rare it was to have that kind of harmony in a blended family. Looking back, I feel like a full point. One evening, Daniel invited me to a corporate dinner. I declined. I had a headache, and honestly, those functions bored me. Ethan offered to go instead. He could use the networking, Daniel said. Ethan agreed too quickly. I thought nothing of it. Later that night, I was reading in bed when Ethan came home. He looked flushed, not drunk, but energized. I asked how it went. Fine, he said, heading straight to his room. The door clicked behind him. I barely noticed. The next morning, I was tidying up the kitchen when Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. A message lit up the screen. Had a good time last night, D. I froze. For a moment, my stomach tightened. But then I let it go. Daniel probably messaged him about the event. Still, something didn't sit right. Why would Daniel sign a message with just D? He never did that. I told myself not to overthink it. Days passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Ethan seemed more confident around Daniel, almost smug at times. He made pointed comments, jokes with a bite. Well, Daniel knows how to entertain, don't you? He said one night when we talked about the dinner. Daniel laughed, but I didn't miss the look they exchanged. I began to pay closer attention. The dynamic had shifted, subtly but undeniably. Ethan interrupted Daniel more often, made him uncomfortable. Daniel, for his part, seemed tired, distracted when I spoke, distant even in small moments. I thought he was stressed at work. I didn't suspect anything more. One afternoon, Daniel left his tablet on the coffee table. I shouldn't have looked. I tell myself that even now. But I did. I only meant to check the news, but I saw a notification on his email, follow-up from Natalie. I clicked. Natalie was a coworker of his, someone I'd met briefly, charming and younger. She was exactly the type women my age feel threatened by, even when we pretend otherwise. Her message was vague. Thanking him for a fun night, promising to keep things between them. My chest tightened. I scrolled up. The conversation was flirtatious, but not incriminating. Nothing physical. Nothing concrete. I still felt sick. I asked Daniel about it that evening. He looked stunned. It was nothing, he said. She flirts with everyone. I didn't respond. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But the crack had formed. I couldn't unsee it. I started thinking back to Ethan. How had he known Natalie? Was it just through Daniel? Something didn't line up. A memory surfaced, from a month ago, Ethan casually mentioning someone named Natalie, saying she wasn't as innocent as she looked. I had assumed it was a classmate. Now I wasn't so sure. I didn't ask. Not yet. But something was unraveling, and I couldn't stop it. That week, I dreamed about drowning. Every night. I'd wake up gasping, heart racing. I didn't tell anyone. Not Ethan, not Daniel. I just smiled through breakfast, folded laundry, cooked dinner. Pretended everything was still perfect, but deep down, I knew something, or someone, had crossed a line. And I feared the truth more than I feared any lie. Let me know when you're ready for section 2. Here is section 2 of your script, exactly 760 words, focused, emotionally layered, and free of repetition. I woke up to the sound of raised voices. At first, I couldn't make out the words, only the intensity. I stepped into the hallway and froze. Ethan's voice, sharp, angry. You said it wouldn't get this far. You promised. Then Daniel, lower, firmer, you're out of control. This needs to stop. I didn't move. I waited until I heard a door slam and silence settle like dust. Later that morning, they acted as if nothing happened. Daniel left for work early. Ethan avoided eye contact. I stood there making coffee like a stranger in my own home. I had stopped asking questions days ago. I started watching instead. That evening, Ethan forgot his phone in the living room. It buzzed once. Then again. I told myself not to look. I did anyway. What I saw didn't feel real. A long thread of texts, some recent, some older. The contact name was saved as just an emoji. But the content left no room for interpretation. Do you miss it? Last night was unexpected but intense. You're still thinking about him, aren't you? The responses weren't from Ethan. They were from a woman. Natalie. I scrolled slowly, disbelief turning into dread. It became clear, Ethan had been involved with Natalie. Not just once. It had been going on for weeks. And worse, she had also been flirting with Daniel, possibly to provoke Ethan. Or maybe to confuse him. Either way, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Calculated. And deeply personal. I didn't confront Ethan that night. I waited for Daniel to come home. When he walked through the door, I asked him straight, "Did you know about Ethan and Natalie?" He froze, keys still in hand. His eyes flicked to the side, then back to me. "Yes," he said. No denial. Just a quiet, broken yes. He told me everything. Natalie had started flirting with him months ago at work. He didn't take her seriously. Then Ethan showed up at one of their events. That night, Ethan and Natalie talked. It escalated quickly. Daniel had no idea at first. But one evening, Ethan came home and admitted it. Said it like a challenge. Like he wanted Daniel to react. Daniel never told me because, in his words, he's your son. I didn't want to put you in that position. But it was too late for that. I was already in it. I found Ethan in the garage, sitting on the floor, staring into space. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I asked him why. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Because he thought she was into him, he said. Because I wanted to prove something. I asked, to who? He shrugged. To both of you. To myself. I don't know. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel love when I looked at him. I saw a man I didn't raise. A man who used sex as punishment, who weaponized intimacy to settle scores. I couldn't wrap my mind around how he could betray not just Daniel, but me. Our family. Our home. He didn't apologize. Not really. He said, I thought you'd understand. After what you went through with Dad. That's when I realized how deep this ran. He wasn't just acting out. He was repeating what he saw. What he absorbed. What I thought I'd protected him from, but this time, I wasn't going to excuse it. I told him he had to leave. Daniel watched from the hallway. He didn't interfere. He didn't speak. That night, I sat in the living room long after they were both gone. Everything felt still, but not calm. I kept thinking of the word boundary. It's something I taught Ethan his whole life. Respect boundaries. Don't cross lines. Don't take what isn't yours, but he had crossed every line. With someone who had been in our home. Around our dinner table. In Daniel's world. In mine. I couldn't decide what hurt more, what Ethan did, or what Daniel hid. One was a betrayal. The other was a choice, and both shattered something I wasn't sure could be repaired. Let me know when you're ready for section 3, the final part. Here is section 3 of your script, exactly 760 words, emotionally sharp, conclusive, and cleanly written with no repetition or filler. Ethan moved out the next day. He didn't fight it. He packed quietly and left before Daniel got home. I stood in the hallway as he walked out, holding a single duffel bag. He didn't say goodbye. I didn't stop him. The house felt emptier than I expected. Not just quieter, but hollow. Daniel tried to be supportive. He offered comfort, made dinner, cleaned without being asked. But I couldn't ignore the silence between us. It was different now. I looked at him and saw the man who had kept something from me, not to hurt me, but to avoid discomfort. And that, in itself, hurt. I started therapy alone. Not for the marriage. For myself. I needed to understand how I missed the signs, how I let my own son drift into a version of himself I didn't recognize. I told my therapist that I wasn't angry, I was numb. And that scared me more. Daniel suggested we take a trip, just the two of us. I declined. I told him I wasn't ready to act like everything was fine. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, and left the room. We became polite strangers. Two people sharing a space that used to feel like home. I began sleeping on the edge of the bed. Sometimes in the guest room. I didn't know if I was punishing him or protecting myself. Maybe both. Weeks passed. Ethan didn't call. I didn't reach out. My sister said I was being too harsh. That family needs forgiveness. But this wasn't about one miss. Here is section 3 of your script, exactly 760 words, emotionally sharp, conclusive, and cleanly written with no repetition or filler. Ethan moved out the next day. He didn't fight it. He packed quietly and left before Daniel got home. I stood in the hallway as he walked out, holding a single duffel bag. He didn't say goodbye. I didn't stop him. The house felt emptier than I expected. Not just quieter, but hollow. Daniel tried to be supportive. He offered comfort, made dinner, cleaned without being asked. But I couldn't ignore the silence between us. It was different now. I looked at him and saw the man who had kept something from me, not to hurt me, but to avoid discomfort. And that, in itself, hurt. I started therapy alone. Not for the marriage. For myself. I needed to understand how I missed the signs, how I let my own son drift into a version of himself I didn't recognize. I told my therapist that I wasn't angry, I was numb. And that scared me more. Daniel suggested we take a trip, just the two of us. I declined. I told him I wasn't ready to act like everything was fine. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, and left the room. We became polite strangers. Two people sharing a space that used to feel like home. I began sleeping on the edge of the bed. Sometimes in the guest room. I didn't know if I was punishing him or protecting myself. Maybe both. Weeks passed. Ethan didn't call. I didn't reach out. My sister said I was being too harsh. That family needs forgiveness. But this wasn't about one mistake. This was about a pattern. A choice. A deliberate harm inflicted on people who trusted him. He hadn't even shown remorse, just distance and self-justification. One night, I opened my laptop and wrote a letter to Ethan. Not to send, just to say the things I couldn't speak out loud. I wrote about who he used to be. About how I missed that boy. About how deeply he'd broken something in me that I wasn't sure could ever be whole again. I wrote that love wasn't unconditional, it came with expectations, responsibilities. And he had walked away from those. I didn't cry while writing it. I cried afterward. Months went by. Life settled into a new rhythm, quieter, more thoughtful. Daniel and I spoke less often, but when we did, it was honest. He admitted he should have told me everything sooner. He said he thought he was protecting me, but now realized he was only delaying the pain. I asked him if he had feelings for Natalie. He said no. That he was flattered by the attention, but never tempted. I believed him. But belief didn't fix the damage. Trust isn't about innocence. It's about openness. And that had been missing when it mattered. We agreed to take a break. No drama. No final words. Just space. He moved into a furnished apartment across town. Said he'd keep paying the mortgage while I decided what I wanted. I thanked him. That was all. One afternoon, out of nowhere, Ethan called. I stared at the screen before answering. His voice was different, flat, tired. He asked if we could meet. I said yes. We sat across from each other at a quiet cafe. He looked older. Not in years, but in weight. He apologized. Not with excuses, not with blame. Just a raw, honest apology. He said he didn't know what he was trying to prove. That hurting Daniel was never supposed to mean hurting me too. That he hated how easily he became someone he didn't respect. I didn't hug him. I didn't tell him it was okay. But I listened. And that was a start. On the drive home, I didn't feel closure, but I felt clarity. I realized forgiveness doesn't mean reunion. It means release. Letting go of the expectation that someone will ever undo what they've done. Accepting that healing is slow and quiet and deeply personal. Daniel called that evening. Asked how it went. I told him the truth. He said he was proud of me. And I knew he meant it. But I also knew we were standing on separate paths, maybe for good. I poured a glass of wine, sat on the back porch, and breathed for the first time in what felt like months. I had spent years being a mother, a wife, a fixer. That night, I chose to just be myself, and finally, that was enough.